We must recognize that the burden of fighting climate change should not rest so heavily on those who are minorities or those who come from low-income backgrounds. Hi, Lil Earthlings proudly presents to our honorable judges, developing regions. To begin, low-income communities contributed less to climate change than developed communities, but it's transparent that they are disproportionately affected. How? Agricultural communities are devastated by droughts, famines are affecting hundreds of thousands of lives, and many other unimaginably detrimental occurrences. So, the question is, how might we support people in poorer regions to reduce their exposure and vulnerability to the adverse effects of climate change, which includes climate variability and extremes?
Now we're going to be taking a look at solutions that already exist. The first one is the Hunger Safety Net Program. This is Kenya's program to reduce poverty and increase people's ability to prepare for disruptions, mainly to reduce people's dependency on emergency food aid. This already prevented a 5% increase in poverty during the 2011 drought. But we see that the problem with this is that it's only a short term solution, and the model only covers cash transfers. The second solution that already exists is the Declaration on Green Growth. This was endorsed by the OECD Ministerial Council meeting in June 2009 to help developing countries promote green growth. Evidently, it has not worked, mainly for two reasons. Firstly, developing countries don't have the resources nor the knowledge to mitigate climate problems. Secondly, developed countries are not invested in helping developing regions.
This is our solution concept. We came up with an original solution with these three concepts in mind. Firstly, we focused on effectiveness. We wanted a solution that will work on a global scale and is effective in both the short term and long term. Secondly, we considered the practicality of the model based on our global situation. Finally, we needed a solution that is fair, one that will evenly distribute responsibility between all parties accordingly to how much they contributed to the problem in the first place. And we do all this while keeping the benefit of the collective global population in mind. This is our solution overview. There are many parts that contribute to the overarching problem of climate change. Each individual phase of our plan was specially designed to tackle the respective aspects of the problem, starting from the most urgent and ending with long-term goals. As presented in the roadmap, there are a total of 4 phases in our plan. But before we talking about each phase, we have two things that we would like you to keep in mind. Firstly, that climate change is a global problem, so we believe that everyone should take part in attempting to tackle it proportionally to that person's ability. In our solution model, we expect each country to participate by contributing a set percentage of their total GDP to add to the global fund for the project. Secondly, we want you to recognize that we are separating countries into three groups, which are developed countries with high standards of living and lots of research capabilities. Secondly, developing countries with lots of natural resources, which they can choose to use to develop their economy. And finally, is the developing countries with not that much natural resources.
Starting with the first phase of our plan, we focus on alleviating the effects that climate change have on developing regions. As you can see, we focus the majority of our funding to pay the countries with natural resources to maintain them, as represented by the purple arrow. We also give them another 10% to develop their regions utilizing environmentally friendly means, such as building windmills, solar cell farms, or investing in other sustainable projects, as represented by the blue arrow in the flowchart. We are also giving 25% of our entire funding to developing nations that are not so rich in resources. And based on the situation that these countries find themselves in, oftentimes extreme poverty and famines, we see that these problems are urgent enough to justify them utilizing traditional methods to develop their communities. Finally, we are setting apart 5% of total funding to support developed nations in their research for a sustainable alternative to industrializing. Phase 2 begin when we have successfully bettered the living conditions for developing areas. We then move on to tackling long-term development. In this phase, we focus more of our funds on developing the economy using eco-friendly methods as seen in the two blue arrows within the flowchart. We reduced the funds given to maintain resources because when these countries become more economically stable, there would be less incentive to use those resources. We are also giving more importance to developing a sustainable way to industrialize, since this would later serve as the gateway to our next phases. The third phase of our plan starts once we have found a way to sustainably develop an economy. We put in the majority of our funds towards eco-friendly development, as exemplified by the total of 80% in blue arrows. The other 20% is pushed towards maintaining natural resources, which is also an integral part in tackling climate change as a whole. In Phase 4, we have almost reached our end goal of a sustainable and eco-friendly world. And it may be 100 years from now, or even more than that, but at this point in time, humanity would have achieved a carbon-neutral world. Sustainability would be key to all upcoming projects, and humanity would finally have the resources to look back and right the wrongs that have been done in the past. The fourth phase of our plan is to cure the Earth of pollutions. We would have the technology and resources to do this in the future, and it would be especially easy with all the countries running a proper sustainable economy. The world will have to unite and make a final push in addressing the issue of climate change forever.
Our solution can bring about many impacts to our world, both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, we can help slow down rapid climate change and in turn mitigate the effects caused by it on developing areas. With these countries in mind as the ones in the highest risk, it is important that we try to help them as soon as possible. Therefore, the first few phases of our plan focus mainly on helping these countries develop and trying to compel these countries to maintain their natural resources to help slow down rapid climate change and thus lessening the effects caused by it. And in the long term, we can finally shift to a sustainable development path. With the continual help from everyone in every country, we can slowly but surely develop into a carbon neutral world. This is represented in the third phase of our plan, where with the majority of our funds being invested into developing an eco-friendly method, sustainability is not that far of a reach. And when that is reached, and only then, can people finally realize what wrongs they have done in the past and correct them, and fully focus on trying to eliminate pollution and eventually climate change entirely. And finally, as a final message, climate change is clearly the biggest issue in this century, and requires cooperation on a global scale to tackle this issue once and for all. In the present day, it is clear that people are still denying the existence of this problem, whether that be because of their own negligence or ignorance. We owe it to this earth to protect it. We owe it to the future generations to preserve the environment that our ancestors left for us. But above all, we owe it to ourselves to look after our precious planet. It is our collective responsibility to right the wrongs done in the past and work together towards a sustainable future.